بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي، وقيني شر نفسي وفلت لساني، وان أضل أضل بغير حق رب العالمين. وبعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I've been asked to come before you tonight and to say some words under the rubric of the title. By the way, I am still that guy in the video. I just have a haircut. But I've been asked to say a few words on the title, putting out the fiery rhetoric of those fanning the flames of war. And before I get into my remarks, I just want to say a few things. First, I really want to congratulate the organizers of RIS and all of those who have contributed in ways large and small for putting together this, what has become for us now an institution. And I hope that the Muslims have enough of an historical consciousness to understand and appreciate what we have achieved in being able to come to this place, in this hall, with these numbers, with these brothers and sisters every year, to have our spirit recharged and re-energized through our mutual brotherhood and sisterhood as Muslims. And I think it's really important for us to understand that this is a landmark. Oftentimes people don't understand their place in history. They are making history without even realizing it. I like to remind people sometimes that the people who started Harvard University were not graduates of Harvard University. They were people who had a vision and who believed in themselves and were able to attract others to that vision, and through that they were able to achieve something great. Inshallah, with RIS, we are at the beginning of a great and lasting institution. I want to thank them on behalf of the Muslims for this opportunity, and I want to congratulate them on this achievement. The second thing that I want to say is that last night there was a dinner in which one of the MPs from the Canadian Parliament was invited, and he was kind, conscientious, and considerate enough to award all of us a gift of a sort of plaque of appreciation for contributions to RIS. I want to return the favor by publicly acknowledging my gratitude for that kind gesture and saying thank you to him and to the Canadian Parliament for showing such a classy and generous gesture toward the Muslims. And I think that it's important that we as Muslims remember that we are a big-minded, a big-hearted, and a classy people. The Prophet ﷺ was a classy individual. And he taught us that whoever is not thankful to the people, they are not thankful to Allah. So again, I just want to say thank you. I also, I'm still touched by the words of my dear brother, Sheikh Ali Habib al-Jifri, and I'm reminded of a hadith that appeared in Sahih Muslim, in which the Prophet ﷺ was in a sense talking about the difference between those who have hard hearts and those who have tender hearts. And he said, جاء أهل اليمن هم أرق أفئدة الإيمان يمان والفقه يمان وَالْحِكْمَةُ يَمَانًا. He said, the people of Yemen have come, and they are the people of the most tender hearts. Iman, faith, is tender. Fiqh is tender. Wisdom is tender. And I was just reminded of that when I was backstage listening to the words of my brother, Sheikh Al-Habib Al-Jifri. Now, on to my topic. Actually, I've been a little bit trying to procrastinate because this is a very difficult topic to talk about, especially at these times. It's a difficult topic to talk about because of the atmosphere that has been not only allowed to develop, but in some ways has been promoted by our leaders, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, who have failed to bring us into our better selves, and instead have chosen to align themselves with the forces of moral gravity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built into His creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ السَّافِلِينَ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. That I have created human beings in the best of molds, and then I reduce them to the lowest of the low, except for those who find their security in me and do righteous deeds. And this is an allusion to the fact that built into the creation is a certain moral gravity, that if we are not striving against that moral gravity, we will be taken down by it. It is easy to be petty. It is easy to be vengeful. It is easy to be unforgiving. It is easy to be bigoted and vindictive. It is difficult. These things come without any effort on our part. I don't have to try to be unforgiving. Most of the time, my sense is that the people who would want forgiveness from me, they don't really deserve it. I have to look for a reason to sort of forgive them. I don't have to strive to be unforgiving. I don't have to strive to be petty and vindictive. But I have to strive to be respectful of people that I neither like nor understand. I have to strive to be big-minded and generous to those, especially, whom I don't think deserve this. I have to strive sometimes to forfeit my rights in consideration of some things that may be more important than my rights. And here we have to understand that as members of communities, sometimes we have to put this rights discourse aside, because there are things on occasion that are more important than my rights. Sometimes the interest of my family is more important than my rights. Sometimes the interest of my community is more important than my rights. Sometimes the interest of society at large may even be more important than my rights. And this is something that we're not used to hearing. And I'm hoping that this is not because we are very removed from the teachings of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I don't have to remind you that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was willing to give up certain rights that he had that were known to him in the interest of something broader. The way of the Arabians was such that everyone in Arabia had the right to come to Mecca to make the pilgrimage. This was before Mecca was the house of the Muslims. Even in Jahiliyyah, all Arabs had a right to come to Mecca and to make the pilgrimage. And yet, when the Prophet ﷺ came to Mecca in the year 6 after the Hijrah to make the pilgrimage, they stopped him from making the pilgrimage. And they were ready to go to war almost in order to stop him from making the pilgrimage. And the Prophet ﷺ, being the big-minded, the big-hearted, the far visionary person that he was willing to forego his right in order to maintain the peace, to forego his right in order to promote something that redounds upon the community and the society at large with even greater benefit. And sometimes we have to get away from the rights discourse if we are to be true followers of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It is very easy to be petty and bigoted and unforgiving, to be reactionary. It is difficult to oppose these. And this is perhaps why the Prophet ﷺ taught us that doing good deeds is not the same as doing bad deeds. He said, ﷺ, whoever man hamma bisayyi'atin, whoever has a mind, has a desire to do a bad deed, but doesn't do it, Allah will record that as a good deed. In fact, that Allah may record that as a good deed and multiply the reward. But if I have an intention to do a good deed, if I have an intention to do a good deed that Allah, and I don't do it, I get a reward for that. If I actually do it, I get numerous rewards for that. But if I have an intention to do a bad deed and I don't do it, I actually get a reward for that, for not doing a bad deed. And if I do it, the punishment or the demerit is not quadrupled or doubled, it's just one. That's because it's harder to do good deeds. It's easier to do bad deeds. And the Prophet ﷺ is teaching this to us as something to remind us of how we might proceed in society. Unfortunately, we are now in an atmosphere where our leaders, instead of leading in a manner that would bring us to our better selves, that would enable us to overcome all these negative impulses that we have, that will enable us to see the mutual interests that we share as a community and as a society. Instead, our leaders are leading us to ways that leave us imprisoned by our passions. And we end up with this sort of zero-sum conversation. If you say something positive about the Muslims, then that's interpreted as being something negative about the non-Muslims. If you say something positive about the non-Muslims, then the Muslims are going to say, well, what are you saying about the Muslims? And we end up in this zero-sum kind of conversation. And the result of that is that most people are reduced to paralysis. They are reduced to silence. And those who would rather exploit society rather than lead society, they take front and center. And that is where we are right now. It is so difficult to talk about Islam in society without being misunderstood, without having one's words taken out of context, without having one's words put to uses and to ends that one never even intended. This is the atmosphere that we're living in right now. And this is the context in which I've been asked to come before you and speak tonight. And I will speak, inshallah ta'ala. Because it is like the old Arab saying goes, الساكت عن الظلم شيطان أخرس. That one who is silent in the face of dhulm, and by the way, dhulm is not just injustice, dhulm is also putting things out of their proper place. One who is silent in the face of this, he or she is like a shaitan who just can't speak. A shaitan who just can't speak. So let me try and say a few words, inshallah, that will hopefully point the way. I pray that Allah bless us with this to get out of this box that we've been locked in, to the point that Muslim communities and non-Muslim communities, they can't even talk to each other anymore. They talk at each other and past each other, but it's very difficult for us to achieve genuine communication. And the first thing I want to say to try to put this in context is that the relationship between Muslims and non-Muslims in the West, in the United States and in Canada, it is just that. It's a relationship. And we must not allow ourselves to be pushed by the voices of negativity to the point that we overlook or we forget the fact that we as a Muslim community are in a relationship with our non-Muslim neighbors and our non-Muslim compatriots. And in fact, this is a relationship that we probably cannot get out of. See, if you're in a marriage and the marriage is not so good, you can what? You can get out. But Muslims are not going anywhere in Canada. Muslims are not going anywhere in America. This is our lot. We are in this relationship with our non-Muslim compatriots, and they are in a relationship with us. And it is this fact of being in this relationship that has to govern the way that we think about interacting with each other. And the only question, there are two questions that we have to begin our thought process with in this context. One, we have to want the relationship to work. I see some of the old heads in the audience here. And I'm sure that they can tell you that the key to making your marriage work, you young people take this down, don't forget this. Don't forget this. The key to making your marriage work is wanting it to work. Is wanting it to work. If you don't want it to work, if you don't value it as a marriage, you or your partner will always find 50,000 excuses for it not to work. You have to want a relationship to work. And we have to want our relationship with our non-Muslim compatriots to work. And they have to want their relationship with us to work. And relationships, this is the second point you want to take down, young people. Relationships are not preserved by a blame game. You cannot preserve a relationship through a blame game. That is not the stuff out of which relationships are sustained. And this brings me to the second thing that we have to understand about a relationship. In a relationship, nobody gets exactly what they want all the time. Relationships are about give and take. They are about compromise. They're about mutual empathy and understanding. And this is something that we have to understand beyond the realm of marriage and into the realm of our relationship with the societies in which we live. They're not going to always get their way, and we're not going to always get ours. They are going to be called upon to sacrifice and to compromise certain things. And we are going to be called upon to sacrifice and compromise certain things. And I know that for many Muslims in this room, that word compromise, it's a cuss word for some Muslims. What you talking about, compromise? Quran and Sunnah, Jack. That's what many Muslims think. And here we come to one of our problems. And this is especially for those who want to follow the Sunnah of Abdal sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The issue is never compromise or not compromise. The issue is to know our religion well enough so that we can separate essentials from non-essentials. And then the issue becomes, what do we compromise and what do we not compromise? That is what we have to understand. And if we don't understand that, we will not be able to sustain relationships. Relationships. This is the reality. But this is exactly the problem with our leaders. Because what our leaders should be doing is leading us in a manner that enables us to negotiate the difficulties of this relationship in a way that keeps everybody vested in the relationship. In a way that keeps everybody in a state of mind or a frame of mind where they can value the relationship. No, I didn't get what I wanted today, but this is a relationship that holds out the possibility of working towards that tomorrow. This is not a lost cause. Leadership is supposed to lead us in a way that sustains our ability to stay involved in our societal relationship. But unfortunately, so many of our leaders, this is not what they're doing. So many of our leaders are simply trying to mobilize their base, as they put it, by demoralizing the Muslims. They are trying to treat the Muslims of their societies as if they are sort of visitors. They're on somebody else's plantation. And they have a choice of either accepting the terms of participation in society that one or another group lays down, or not participating in society. They see the society as their society. And as their society, it is not the Muslim society. But the reality is that Canadian Muslims are Canadians. And American Muslims are Americans. And these are just as much the societies of the Muslims as they are the non-Muslims. And they cannot alienate us from our societies in this way. And that is not the business of leadership. They are supposed to be leaders for everyone in the society. And in fact, this violence, and they know that this is the case. I had a friend of mine. His father was a diplomat. I won't say to which country. His father was a diplomat. And he told me once that the first rule of diplomacy is that no matter how deeply you may differ with the other side's interests, you must acknowledge and recognize it. Because the moment you say, I don't care about you, that's it. There's nothing to talk about. Why should I sit down with someone who says, I don't care about your interests? What is there to talk about? That is the first rule of diplomacy. And so when we have differences, and this applies to the Muslims as well, I'm going to get to us later, have some time. We should be mutually respectful of each other's interests, even if we're not able to fully acknowledge them as a practical reality. This is the kind of leadership that keeps relationships alive. But we have leaders who are running around saying things like, we have people in the United States, for example, who are actually putting themselves forth to be president of the United States of America. And they are saying things like, we want a constitutional ban on Sharia. A constitutional ban. Now notice here, he didn't say we want a constitutional ban on hudud. That's not what he said. He said hudud. He said what? Sharia. From beginning to end. Now the reality is that he doesn't know very much about Sharia. None of them know very much about Sharia. And the point of this is to mobilize their base by demoralizing the Muslims and sending a lesson to the Muslims, sending a message to the Muslims that you should not even try to carve out a dignified existence for yourselves here. This is the whole point of this campaign, to demoralize Muslims to the point that they feel that they can't even begin to carve out a dignified existence for themselves. And here we have to ask, is this leadership? Is this leadership? Is this really what is going to make American society better? And all this talk about Muslims trying to take over America and impose this and impose that, this is nonsense, and they know it. And I'll tell you how they know it. Because the days of imposing religion, over, gone, done. That's a historical period that has passed. It's over. And they know it. If America, with all her prestige, and all her money, and all her military, and all her history, if America cannot impose itself on third world countries in the 21st century, how is it reasonable to be fearful of a few million Muslims that they're going to impose something on American society? This is nonsense. The days of imposing are over. They're gone. In fact, we can't even impose on our children like we used to. When I was growing up, Pop could handle his business. You can't even do that anymore. I'm not talking about it's against the law. It's against the fitr of our children now. They won't accept that now. The days of imposition are over. And our politicians should stop talking as if there's this big threat out there waiting to take over. We are all citizens of this society, and we should all be invested in to see what we can bring to the table that enhances the well-being of the society. And no, we don't all agree. No, we don't all agree. But inshallah, that should be precisely the strength of us. If you have a business right now, many of your Christian employees, they're going to take off for Christmas. Is it tomorrow? Monday. Sunday, sorry. They're going to take off for Christmas. Your Muslim workers would be willing to do what? Y'all a little slow on that one. Your Muslim workers will be willing to work. This is an advantage. This is not something that takes from you. This is something that can add to you. And this should be the role of leadership in our societies. And you know, Abraham Lincoln, the great American president, he said something once. He said, any human being will strive to overcome adversity. If you really want to know a man's character, give him power and see how he uses power. Our leaders have been given power, but they're not leading us. They are abusing us. They are exploiting our fears, and they are letting down our societies. And in fact, they are on the wrong side of history, because reality on the ground has already outstripped them. And in this context, I have a question for many of those politicians in America. I'll talk about Canada in a minute. I have a question. And I think this question should demonstrate the extent to which many of them are just out of touch. I understand that you don't want my vote. I'm a Muslim, you don't care about my vote. You're willing to just pass me by because I'm just a small little tiny Muslim minority, and you can get into office without me. So you think. But I have a question. Why should my Christian mother vote for you then? Why should my Christian neighbor vote for you? Why should my Jewish provost vote for you when she knows that you're going to demoralize a valued member of her intellectual community? Why should she vote for you? These are the societies that we actually live in. And these are the resources that our leaders should be investing toward the end of lifting society up. And all of us must band together to send our leaders a message. Like leaders in other parts of the world have been sent a message. We don't want this negative leadership anymore. We don't want this anymore. We want our societies to be enhanced. We want to accentuate the positive. We don't want this divisiveness anymore. And I'm not talking about this wishy-washy, there are no differences between Jews and Muslims and no difference between Christians and yes, there are. Of course there are. But that's precisely why leadership needs to come forth and lead in a way that enables us to manage these differences. Now, I've been talking about America, and I'm a guest here in Canada, so I want to behave. But my understanding is that American politicians are not the only ones who are given to certain overly broad statements that tend to smear entire communities with stigmas that they should not be smeared with. I'm not a Canadian, and I want to be respectful of that fact. I don't want to poke my nose in Canadian politics, but as an American, let me just offer this in the way of a little bit of neighborly advice. If you find Muslims who are guilty of real or even planned acts of terrorism, if you find Muslims who are guilty of real or even planned acts of terrorism, prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. And as a Muslim, I will applaud you for protecting society against people who want to kill innocent human beings. I support you in that. But treat these crimes as crimes that have been committed by criminals, not as character traits that are supposed to be applied to entire communities as some kind of inherent character trait that they have as Muslims. Criminals do crime, prosecute them, but do not smear entire communities. And I'm saying this not because my community right now is the one that happens to be smeared. I'm saying this for two reasons. One, it's not fair, it's wrong. It's wrong because intentionally or not, it demoralizes and subjugates the spirit of Canadian Muslims, an entire community. Your people, they're Canadians. And this subjugates their spirit. This kind of rhetoric where we say our biggest problem is Islamism and these Muslim communities, this kind of rhetoric has the same effect on Muslims in Canada that whites-only signs used to have on blacks back in America. It tells them something is wrong with you, not because of something you did or did not do, but purely and solely because of who you are. This is what this does. And then we are expected to raise healthy, productive children when you have created an atmosphere where they have to doubt their own self-worth. They have to doubt their own ability to achieve in society. This is not right, this is not fair, and this is not worthy of leadership, Canadian, American, Muslim, or non-Muslim. The second reason is that this kind of rhetoric is counterproductive. It's counterproductive because it has the effect of alienating Muslims, of making them feel that they are not a part of the society in which they live, of making them feel that their identity as Canadians is counterfeit. that they don't really belong. And here I want to say that it is alienation far more than anything that could ever emerge out of Islam. It is alienation that is the biggest promoter of violent extremism in these societies, especially among the youth. And I want to share with you an actual exchange that I had. And I'm sharing it just so that we understand what is at stake here. Because people keep acting as if there's something inherent in Islam that leads to radicalization. Whereas in point of fact, when young people are alienated, whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or even atheist, they tend to radicalize. They are fighting for a sense of self and fighting against nobodiness. In fact, there was a Catholic priest in California. He works with gangs. And one of the things that he said about his work is that the biggest mistake that people make when they think about how we're going to deal with gangs is that they ask, why are these young men attracted to these gangs? He said, that is the wrong question, because young people are not attracted to gangs. They are not running to gangs. If we want to understand them, we have to ask what they are running from. They don't run to gangs. They run from something else. And as Muslim youth are running to radicalism, we have to ask ourselves, what are they running from? They're running from being alienated in the society. And this kind of rhetoric promotes that alienation. It is not in the interest of these societies themselves. I had a conversation with this is an experience I want to share with you, if I have time. And I didn't even get to the Muslims yet. I was invited to I've written about this, so this is nothing new. But I wanted to share this because I think it's relevant to the point to be made. I was in the Midwest. They invited me to one of these universities to give a lecture. So after MSA. So after the lecture, they invited me out to dinner, and I got into this conversation with a young Pakistani medical student. He was a young man born in America. Big, beautiful black beard, like mine used to be. And we got to this conversation. He started talking about how he could not see himself as an American, that he was a Pakistani. So I said to him, what are you talking about? He said, as a Muslim, I can't see myself. I'm Pakistani. So I said to him, you ain't no Pakistani. You can't go back to Pakistan. You can't speak the language like they speak. You can't eat the food they eat. The duties of friendship would wear you out in a place like Pakistan. You know, you're not socialized in Pakistan. You are an American, and you need to simply accept that. And we went on and on until it occurred to me that it wasn't Islam that was the problem. It was the problem that in America at the time, the atmosphere was one that sent a message that these brown people with olive skin, they can't be real Americans. And this young man was saying, in a sense, well, if you don't want me, I don't want you. And he was totally alienated from his society. And we sat there and we talked. I mean, it was exhausting, to be honest with you. But we kept at it. And I kept telling him, but you are giving the society over to the very people who are trying to alienate you from it. This is your society, and you need to stake your own claim in your own society. And so we kept going back and forth like this for the whole night, and we ended. I thought it was just a waste of time. The next day, they picked me up to take me to the airport. And this same young man came up to me, and he handed me an envelope. And I just stuffed it in my jacket pocket. I realized, I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably should have opened it first, but I stuffed it in my jacket pocket. So when I got to the airport, I opened it up, and I read it. And he had written a note to me. I want to read you part of what he wrote to me. He said, I want to thank you for talking with me. These days I had a lot of radicalness in me. Honestly, it's not because I like to fight or something, but I am truly lost. I see no clear path to success. And he's not talking about doing success. He was a medical student. I see no clear path to success. And then just think about taking out the aggressor of the Muslims. I mean, my brother, you hit a home run in describing a second-generation Muslims. We don't know where to go, we don't know what to do, how to do it, and are getting so lost that all we see is jihad. And this is not just me. I know so many people like this, so many, put them all in capital letters. And you really shook me down just by being direct, straight to the point, and putting me on the spot. The youth need this approach. They need to be questioned and shook so that they snap back to reality. Now, what is the approach that he's talking about? A dissertation on jihad? No, we didn't talk about jihad at all. We talked about what? How he can reclaim his place in American society as an American. And once he became convinced that he could reclaim his place in his own society, that he was not a resident alien, then he had no sense of a grudge against that society. And he was perfectly willing to then go on and be a productive member. This rhetoric of alienation is a problem. It is not a solution. And I want to say to Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. President in America and all of our leaders, but especially here in Canada, because you have a great country. You have a country that, even in the midst of all the economic and the political turmoil all around the world, you remain the envy of the world. You remain a model of what many countries around the world aspire to be. You have a great people, and you have one of the greatest immigrant populations that any country could want. I want to urge you, do not alienate your Muslims. Preserve and strengthen your relationship with them. Cultivate it. Invest in them. And you will see helping hands of cooperation emerge from places that you probably never expected them to emerge from. And I appeal to you to do this, not simply in the interest of the Muslims, but in the interest of your society as a whole. Now, I have 3 minutes, but I have some things to say to the Muslims. And these are, to me, really important things. Because, as I said, we are involved in a relationship. And in a relationship, there are always what? There are always two sides. As the old Arabic saying goes, if you're a judge and a litigant comes before you with his eye plucked out, don't judge until you see his adversary, because he might have both eyes plucked out. Get both sides of the story. And while it is true that our leaders in many instances fail us by not bringing out the best in us and instead playing on our fears that are natural to human beings. Human beings are insecure by nature. And this is why the key element, the key concept in the Quran is Iman. And Iman will be led to bring about that ultimate security through a relationship with Allah. This is why the Prophet said the most truthful of names is Al-Harith wal-Hammam, toiler and anxious. That's who we are as human beings. And rather than provide us with ways of channeling these natural impulses, our leaders tend to exploit them. Ooh. But I want to say this to the Muslims. We are in a relationship. And we should remember in that context the saying attributed to Muawiyah, who said, between me and society is a thread. When they pull on that thread, I what? I relent. And when they relent, I pull on that thread. And I manage that balance in such a way that that thread between me and society never breaks. And we Muslims here in the West, we have to understand that that thread will break if we don't learn how to pull and relent. One of our problems, I gotta speed up here because I'm being a bad guest. My time is out. But I wanna say two things. One of the things that is one of our problems here, especially in the West, we are a small, tiny minority in the most powerful, most advanced, wealthy, culturally sophisticated and diversified societies in the history of humanity. And we keep trying to negotiate our way in these societies on the basis of Islam 101. We can't do that. We have to become much more sophisticated in our understanding of Islam. And our leaders, Muslim leaders, they have to help us come into this understanding so that we can understand the nature of compromise in Islam. And that we don't compromise those things that are not to be compromised in Islam. And we don't refuse pig-headedly to compromise those things that can. This is the teaching of Abul Qasim. I want to say one last thing because I want to pull you into a mindset that maybe you will understand fully what I'm trying to say here, because we don't understand the nature of what we're dealing with right now. The 19th century was a century in which the West dislocated other societies all around the world. The colonial period dislocated entire societies. The 20th century, however, was a century in which the West itself began to have to pay the price of some of its own rhetoric and some of its own ideals. It was okay when you said liberté, égalité, fraternité, when you were in a position to deny that to anybody you wanted to deny it to. But as the 20th century wore on, people started to demand their rights to be more full participants in society. And what we end up with is that in Western societies, the cultural hegemony of the dominant group becomes challenged by more peoples coming into the public square and insisting on a dignified existence for themselves. This happened in the United States. It was one thing to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, when you can keep blacks in a position where they didn't even enjoy the basic human rights. But over a period of time, America itself began to take those very premises seriously, and more people began to come into the public square. And so now what we have is that the dominant cultures in Western societies are culturally threatened. They are culturally threatened. They are in a position now where their cultural impulses cannot be simply assumed to be right. They now have to negotiate their way in society like everybody else. Muslims must understand that because they don't have a name for the cultural threat that we represent, they refer to it as Islam. They refer to it as Islam. They are culturally threatened, and the threat itself is Islam. Now, I've run out of time, but I just want to say this. I keep saying that, don't I? I'm going to stop. Listen to me, and I'm not talking about, I'm not even talking to the assimilationists. There are some people who just want to assimilate in society because they can't take the pressure. They're not principled. When the Prophet ﷺ, when he moved from Mecca to Medina, do you know what he tried to do? He tried to find the cultural sensibilities of the society and blend in with the society, not as an act of capitulation, but as an act of saying, I'm not here to destroy and divide, I'm here to build and unite. The Prophet himself
Sheikh Habib is here, he can tell you. When the Prophet went to Medina, the Meccans used to part their hair. That looks funny on me now, doesn't it? Anyway, the Meccans used to part their hair. When he went to Medina, the Jews grew their hair long with no part. The Prophet did that. See, I'm one of you. All right? Now, it is true that the Prophet also said that there are ways in which we should carve out our own separate identity. And here comes the challenge for the Muslims. How do we affect cultural sensitivity to the point that we're not aliens, and at the same time have cultural integrity to the point that we are true to our religion? This is our challenge in the West. And in order to do that, we have to be able to balance harms and interests. We have to be able to do that. And our leaders, they have to be willing to teach us how to live a balanced life. We cannot go on Islam 101, because the reality is, this stuff is checkers. This stuff is chess, not checkers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.